My daughter said, "Don't come to my wedding, Dad. You'll only embarrass me." I stayed home in silence. 2 hours later, my phone rang. The wedding had been stopped. The day my daughter told me not to come to her wedding, I felt something inside me break. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Dad, please don't come. You'll only embarrass me." For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I had imagined walking her down the aisle since the day she was born. I remembered carrying her on my shoulders, teaching her to ride a bicycle, staying awake all night whenever she had a fever, and working double shifts just to make sure she never had to sleep hungry. Yet none of those memories mattered anymore. She lowered her eyes and whispered, "Everyone at the wedding is successful. Lawyers, doctors, business owners. They all drive luxury cars." Then she looked at my worn-out work boots. "I don't want people asking why my father is just a maintenance worker." The words hurt more than any injury I'd ever suffered. I smiled anyway. "If that's what you want, sweetheart." She nodded without hugging me. "I'll send you pictures." That was all. After she left, the house felt painfully quiet. On the kitchen wall still hung dozens of photographs. There she was at 5 years old, wearing a paper crown. There she was at 10, proudly holding a school trophy. There she was at 16, hugging me after passing her exams. Every picture reminded me of happier days. Her mother had died when Emily was only 7. From that day on, I became both father and mother. I learned to braid hair from online videos. I burned countless dinners before finally learning how to cook. I never missed a parent-teacher meeting. I sold my motorcycle so she could attend a better school. When she dreamed of becoming an architect, I secretly worked weekend jobs to pay for expensive drawing classes. She never knew. I wanted her future to be brighter than mine. Years passed. She graduated from college with honors. I cried louder than anyone at graduation. That same evening she hugged me tightly and said, "Dad, everything I am is because of you." I believed those words would last forever. I was wrong. Success slowly changed her. At first it was little things. She stopped introducing me to her coworkers. She asked me not to wear my work uniform near her office. Later she stopped inviting me to company events. Eventually our phone calls became shorter. Then came Daniel, her wealthy fiancé. His family owned hotels across the state. His father appeared in magazines. His mother hosted charity galas attended by celebrities. The first time I met them, I knew I didn't belong. Daniel himself was polite enough. But his parents looked at me as if I were invisible. His mother glanced at my faded jacket and forced a smile. "So, what business are you in?" "I'm a maintenance supervisor." Oh, that single word carried enough disappointment to fill the room. Dinner became painfully awkward. Whenever I spoke, someone quickly changed the subject. When the bill arrived, I reached for my wallet. Daniel's father laughed. "No need." He said it kindly. But somehow I still felt humiliated. As we walked outside, Emily whispered, "Dad, next time let them pay without making it awkward." I hadn't tried to impress anyone. I only wanted to contribute. From then on, I noticed how often she apologized for me. She corrected my grammar. She bought me expensive clothes I never wore. She insisted I stop driving my old pickup truck whenever I visited. One afternoon she even offered to hire someone to renovate my tiny house. "I don't want Daniel's family thinking I grew up like this." I smiled. "This house raised you." She looked away. "I know." Months later she announced her engagement. Everyone celebrated. I did too, even though a small voice inside me worried I was slowly losing my daughter. Then came the invitation, or rather, the lack of one. Instead of handing me a wedding invitation, she came alone. Her hands trembled. She couldn't meet my eyes. Then she spoke the sentence that would haunt me forever. "Please don't come." Silence filled the room. I nodded. "If that's your decision." She burst into tears. "I'm sorry." But she still left. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up before sunrise. Out of habit, I ironed my best suit. It was old. It had been the suit I wore at her mother's funeral. The same suit I wore to Emily's college graduation. I placed it on the bed. Then I slowly folded it again and returned it to the closet. Instead, I made myself a simple breakfast. Toast, coffee, eggs. I couldn't swallow any of it. At 11 o'clock I imagined guests arriving. At noon I imagined music beginning. At 1 o'clock I imagined my daughter walking down the aisle. Without me, I sat alone on the porch. The neighborhood was peaceful. Children rode bicycles. Dogs barked in the distance. Life continued as though my heart wasn't breaking. Then, Exactly 2 hours after the ceremony had begun, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. For a second I considered ignoring it. Finally I answered. Hello. A frightened woman's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Carter. Yes. This is the wedding venue. My stomach tightened. There has been an incident. What happened? There was a long pause. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. The wedding has been stopped. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered across the porch. Before I could ask another question, she added, Your daughter keeps asking for you. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. The wedding stopped, I finally asked. Yes, sir, the woman replied, her voice shaking. Please come as soon as you can. Your daughter needs you. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and rushed to my old pickup truck. The engine struggled before finally starting. As I drove toward the venue, my mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Had someone been hurt? Had there been an accident? Or was Emily in danger? 25 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of the luxurious hotel where the wedding was being held. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Guests stood outside in small groups, whispering. The music had stopped. Something was terribly wrong. As I stepped out of my truck, dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some recognized me from the engagement dinner. Others simply stared at the man in the old suit climbing out of a rusty pickup. I ignored them and hurried inside. Near the ballroom doors, a wedding coordinator rushed toward me. Mr. Carter, where's my daughter? She's in the bridal suite. I didn't wait for directions. When I opened the door, Emily was sitting on the floor in her white wedding dress. Her makeup had run from crying. The bouquet lay beside her, crushed. The moment she saw me, she stood up and ran into my arms. Dad, she cried like she hadn't cried since she was a little girl. I held her tightly. I'm here. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked softly, what happened? She wiped away her tears. I should have listened to you. I never warned you about anything. No, she whispered. You warned me with your actions. I just refused to see it. Before I could respond, an older man entered the room. It was Daniel's uncle. He looked exhausted. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said. Mr. Carter, there are things you deserve to know. Emily nodded. Tell him. The man took a deep breath. This morning, just before the ceremony, Daniel's father presented your daughter with several legal documents. What kind of documents? He wanted her to sign a prenuptial agreement. I frowned. That's not unusual. It wasn't the prenup that shocked everyone. He hesitated. There were additional papers. Emily lowered her head. They wanted me to give up any future claim to the family businesses, and agree that if the marriage ended, I would leave with nothing. I remained silent. But that's not all, she continued. They also wanted me to cut off regular contact with you. My heart skipped a beat. They said your background could damage the family's public image. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily continued through tears. They wanted me to move overseas after the wedding, and visit you only with permission. My hands slowly clenched. And Daniel, she closed her eyes. He said nothing. The silence answered everything. He just stood there while his parents explained why you weren't suitable. I looked toward the window, struggling to stay calm. I asked him one question, Emily whispered. If they treated your father this way, would you accept it? She paused. He couldn't answer. The room fell silent again. I realized then, she said, that I had spent years pushing away the one person who never asked me to choose between love and success. She looked directly into my eyes. I became the kind of person I promised I'd never become. Tears rolled down her face. I'm so sorry, Dad. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder. People make mistakes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not today, I said quietly. But every child deserves a chance to become better. She hugged me again. Outside, voices echoed through the hallway. The wedding guests were beginning to leave. Daniel knocked softly on the door. Emily, can we talk? She looked at me. What should I do? I smiled gently. This decision is yours. She walked to the door, opened it just enough to face him, and spoke calmly. I loved you. Daniel lowered his head. I know. But when your family insulted my father, you stayed silent. I'm sorry. So am I. She slowly removed her engagement ring. Then she placed it in his hand. Goodbye, Daniel. She closed the door. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Emily turned toward me. Dad, yes. Would you still walk with me? I looked at her, confused. The wedding is over. She smiled sadly. I know, but I never got the chance to walk beside the man who deserved that honor most. She held out her hand. With tears in my eyes, I took it. Together, we walked slowly through the empty ballroom. There were no musicians, no applause, no ceremony, only a father and daughter, healing one broken step at a time. As we reached the end of the aisle, Emily whispered, "This is where you were always supposed to be." I squeezed her hand, and for the first time in years, I felt that I hadn't lost my daughter after. The ballroom emptied within an hour. The flowers were still beautiful. The candles still burned, but the celebration everyone had planned had quietly come to an end. Emily changed out of her wedding dress and into a simple blue sweater and jeans. Without the expensive gown, the jewelry, and the makeup, she looked like the little girl I had raised. On the drive home, neither of us said much. As we reached my small house, she smiled faintly. "Can I stay here tonight?" I laughed softly. "You never have to ask." Inside, everything looked exactly as it had years before. The old family photographs still covered the walls. Her childhood trophies sat on the shelf. Even the height marks I had drawn on the kitchen doorway were still there. Emily ran her fingers over one of the marks. "I was 10. You insisted you'd be taller than me before high school." She laughed for the first time that day. I almost made it. That evening, we ate homemade vegetable soup at the same wooden table where she had done homework as a child. "It tastes exactly the same," she said. "I never changed the recipe." She smiled through tears. "I missed this." The next morning, Emily surprised me. "Dad, I want to know everything. Everything, every sacrifice you made that you never told me about." I hesitated. "There isn't much to tell." She folded her arms. "I know you." After a long silence, I finally spoke. "I sold my motorcycle to pay for your first year at the private school." Her eyes widened. "I worked night shifts for 3 years to cover your college entrance classes." She stared at me in disbelief. "I skipped surgery on my shoulder because I couldn't afford both the operation and your architecture program." Emily covered her mouth. What? The pain eventually became manageable. She burst into tears again. "I never knew. I didn't want you to." She took my rough hands into hers. "They're covered in scars." I smiled. "Every one of them helped build your future." She cried harder. "I'm ashamed of myself." I gently shook my head. "No, be ashamed only if you refuse to learn." Over the following weeks, Emily canceled her honeymoon, returned the expensive gifts, and quietly moved back into my neighborhood. Many people expected her to disappear from public life after the wedding disaster. Instead, she did something no one expected. She held a press conference. Standing before dozens of reporters, she spoke calmly. "I judged my father by his job instead of his character." The room fell silent. "He spent his life building mine while I worried about what strangers thought." She paused. I was wrong. News channels carried her speech across the country. Thousands of people praised her honesty. Others criticized her. She accepted both. A few days later, Daniel came to my house alone. He looked exhausted. "I owe you an apology." I invited him inside. He looked around the modest living room. "So this is where Emily grew up?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I never realized how much love was here." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "I've decided to leave my family's company," he said quietly. "They wanted me to choose status over integrity." "And what did you choose?" He smiled sadly. "I chose to become someone my future children could respect." I shook his hand. "I hope you succeed." Months passed. Emily found a new job with a small architectural firm that valued talent over social status. The salary was lower. The happiness was greater. Every Sunday she visited me for lunch. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we simply sat on the porch watching the sunset. One afternoon she asked, "Dad, why didn't you hate me after everything I said?" I looked toward the fading sky. "Because love isn't a reward for perfect behavior." She quietly wiped away a tear. "It's a promise." A year later, Emily organized a community project. She designed affordable housing for struggling families. When the first building was completed, she invited me to the opening ceremony. As I arrived, I noticed hundreds of people gathered outside. Then Emily walked onto the stage. She smiled. "I'd like everyone to meet the man who taught me that true wealth isn't measured by money." She pointed toward me. "My father." The audience stood and applauded. I had never felt so proud. Not because people were clapping, but because my daughter had finally learned what really mattered. As I walked onto the stage, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." I smiled. "I never will." The applause continued, but all I could hear was the voice of the little girl who once believed her father could. Fix anything. And this time, she believed it again. 5 years passed. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. Emily's affordable housing company grew steadily. She became known not for marrying into wealth, but for helping ordinary families own safe, dignified homes. One afternoon she knocked on my front door with a familiar smile. "Dad," she said, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." Standing behind her was a kind-looking man named Michael, a school teacher. He stepped forward, shook my hand firmly, and said, "I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Carter." I smiled. "I hope only the good parts." He laughed. "Only the best." Over the next year, I watched how he treated Emily. He respected her opinions, admired her work, and never cared that she came from a small house or that her father had spent his life fixing broken machines. One evening he visited me alone. "I want to ask Emily to marry me," he said. "I wanted your blessing first." I looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. "You already have it." A few months later, Emily came home carrying a wedding invitation. She didn't leave it on the table. She placed it carefully in my hands. Then she whispered, "This time, there's one request." I looked at her. "I won't get married unless you walk me down the aisle." My eyes filled with tears. On the wedding day, I wore the same old suit, but this time it had been carefully tailored. Emily had secretly restored it because she knew what it meant to me. As the music began, she took my arm. "Dad," she said softly, "years ago I was ashamed because I thought people would judge you." She paused. "Today, if anyone asks who you are, I'll proudly say you're the greatest man I've ever known." Together, we walked down the aisle. Not a single person looked away. Many guests wiped tears from their eyes. When we reached the front, Michael smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for raising such an incredible woman." I placed Emily's hand in his. "Take care of each other." "I promise," he replied. Years later, Emily and Michael had a daughter. The little girl loved visiting Grandpa's house. She laughed in the same backyard where Emily had once played. One afternoon my granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, are you rich?" I smiled. "I don't have millions." She thought for a moment. "Mom says you're the richest man she knows." I looked at Emily. She smiled and nodded. "You gave me honesty, kindness, courage, and unconditional love. Those are treasures money can never buy." As I watched my daughter and granddaughter laughing together, I realized something. The greatest victory wasn't stopping a wedding. It wasn't proving anyone wrong. It was getting my daughter back. Sometimes people chase wealth, status, and approval, only to discover that the greatest blessings were beside them all along. And if love is real, forgiveness can rebuild even the most broken family. The years passed more quickly than I expected. Retirement gave me something I had never really known before: time. For decades, every morning had started before sunrise. I had rushed from one repair job to another, fixing broken pipes, damaged electrical systems, and worn-out machines. My hands had become rough from years of honest work. Now those same hands spent more time planting flowers in the small garden behind my house. One Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived carrying a large folder. "Dad," she said with a grin, "I need your opinion." I laughed. "You've become one of the city's most respected architects. Why would you need my opinion?" She placed several blueprints on the kitchen table. "Because you're the smartest builder I know." Together we spent hours studying the plans. She had designed a neighborhood of affordable homes for widows, retired workers, veterans, and families struggling to make ends meet. As I looked through the drawings, I noticed something. "You've added extra ramps," she smiled, "for disabled residents, and wider hallways, so wheelchairs can move easily." I looked at her proudly. "You remembered." She nodded. "I remembered everything you taught me." Months later, construction began. Emily insisted I visit the site every week. The workers welcomed me warmly. Some even called me Mr. Carter, with genuine respect. One afternoon a young apprentice asked me, "Were you really a maintenance supervisor for 40 years?" "I was." He smiled. "Emily says she learned problem solving by watching you fix things instead of throwing them away." I couldn't help smiling. Perhaps that was true. Not just with machines, with people too. One morning, Emily called me unexpectedly. "Dad, can you come to the office?" Her voice sounded serious. When I arrived, I found reporters waiting outside. Inside the conference room sat several investors. Emily looked nervous. She whispered, "They're offering to fund projects across the country." I squeezed her shoulder. "Then tell them the truth." "What truth?" "The same truth you've always lived by." Minutes later she stood before the investors. Our company doesn't build luxury houses. She paused. We build homes people can actually afford. One investor frowned. You'll make less profit. Emily smiled confidently. Maybe. But we'll change more lives. Silence filled the room. Then the oldest investor slowly stood up. He extended his hand. That's exactly why we want to work with you. Emily looked toward me. Our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. That evening she visited my house again. She handed me a framed photograph. It showed the two of us walking through the empty wedding aisle years earlier. Beneath the picture she had written, "The man who taught me that character is worth more than reputation." I carefully placed the frame beside the old family photographs. For a long time we simply looked at them. Finally Emily whispered, "I almost lost the most important person in my life because I cared too much about people whose opinions never mattered." I smiled gently. "But you found your way back." She nodded. "Because you left the door open." Outside, the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon. Inside, the little house felt warmer than ever. For the first time in many years, there was no regret between us. Only gratitude. And although neither of us knew what the future would bring, we both understood one thing. No amount of money, no amount of status, and no amount of public approval could ever replace the quiet strength of a father's unconditional love. A year after the new housing project opened, Emily received an unexpected invitation. She had been nominated for the National Community Builder Award, one of the country's highest honors for architects who improve people's lives. "Dad," she said excitedly, "the award ceremony is next Friday." I smiled. "That's wonderful. But I won't go unless you come with me." I laughed softly. "Are you sure you won't be embarrassed by your old father this time?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'll spend the rest of my life making up for those words." The night of the ceremony, she insisted I wear the same restored suit from her wedding. When we entered the grand ballroom, hundreds of guests turned toward us. Years ago, those stares would have made Emily nervous. Now she proudly held my arm. During the ceremony, the host announced her name. "Ladies and gentlemen, this year's National Community Builder Award goes to Emily Carter." The audience erupted in applause. Emily walked to the stage, accepted the award, and stood behind the microphone. After thanking her team, she paused. "I wasn't supposed to tell this story tonight," she began. "But I think someone here needs to hear it." The room became silent. "Years ago, I told my father not to attend my wedding because I thought his job made him an embarrassment." A wave of surprise spread through the audience. I believed success was measured by wealth and status. She looked toward me. "I was wrong," she continued. "My father spent 40 years repairing buildings. What I didn't realize was that he was also repairing lives, including mine." Many people wiped tears from their eyes. She held up the award. "This doesn't belong to me alone." Then she smiled. "Dad, would you please come to the stage?" I froze. The audience began applauding. Emily waited patiently. Slowly, I walked onto the stage. She placed the award in my hands. "You earned this long before I did." The applause grew even louder. The next morning, newspapers across the country published the photograph of us standing together. The headline read, "Architect honors father who taught her the true meaning of success." Messages poured in from thousands of people. Parents shared the story with their children. Teachers discussed it in classrooms. Families who had stopped speaking to one another began reaching out to reconcile. Emily read one message aloud. It says, "Because of your story, I called my father after 7 years of silence." She smiled through tears. Maybe this is the real award. A few weeks later, we visited the first neighborhood she had built. Children were playing in the park. An elderly woman recognized Emily and walked over. She hugged her tightly. "Because of you, I finally have a safe home." Emily pointed toward me. "My father is the reason I became the person I am today." The woman turned to me and smiled. "Then thank you, sir." As we walked back to the car, Emily slipped her hand into mine just as she had done when she was a little girl. "You know, Dad, what? I used to think you built buildings." I smiled. "I did." She shook her head. "No." She looked at me with pride. "You built people." I couldn't answer. Some moments are simply too meaningful for words. We drove home as the sun set across the horizon, grateful for the second chance life had given us. And deep in my heart, I knew the greatest legacy I would ever leave behind wasn't a fortune, a business, or a famous name. It was a daughter who had learned that love, humility, and forgiveness are the strongest foundations anyone can build. 3 years after the award ceremony, Emily's company had expanded into several states. Thousands of families were living in safe, affordable homes because of her work. Despite her success, one thing never changed. Every Sunday afternoon, she came to my little house for lunch. No assistants, no reporters, no luxury cars parked outside for attention. Just my daughter. One rainy Sunday, she arrived carrying an old cardboard box. "I found this in the attic," she said. Inside were dozens of photographs, school drawings, birthday cards, and faded report cards. At the bottom of the box was a small glass jar. Emily frowned. "What's this?" I smiled. "My dream fund." She looked confused. I opened the lid. Inside were hundreds of old coins and small bills. "When you were little," I explained, "every spare dollar went into this jar." "For what?" "For your dreams." She stared at it in silence. "I couldn't always save much, but I promised myself that every coin would help you one day." Emily gently held the jar against her chest. "I thought this was just an old jar." "No," I said quietly. "It was my future, because you were my future." She broke down, in tears. That evening, we visited her mother's grave together. Emily placed fresh white lilies beside the headstone. She whispered, "Mom, I finally understand what Dad sacrificed for me." The wind moved softly through the trees. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Before leaving, Emily looked at the stone and smiled. "I'll take care of him now." Months later, my health began to decline. The doctors insisted I needed heart surgery. When Emily heard the news, she immediately canceled every meeting on her calendar. "I'm staying with you." I tried to protest. "You have work. I have priorities," she replied. "And you're first." The surgery lasted several hours. When I finally opened my eyes, Emily was asleep in the chair beside my bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The nurse smiled. She never left. As I recovered, I realized something. Years ago, I had spent sleepless nights beside her hospital bed. Now our roles had changed. Love had come full circle. One evening, after I returned home, Emily handed me a small envelope. Inside was the original wedding invitation from years ago. Across the front she had written in neat handwriting, "The biggest mistake of my life, and the greatest lesson God ever gave me." She looked at me nervously. "I've kept it all these years so I'd never forget who I almost became." I folded the invitation and gave it back. "You don't need to carry that guilt forever." "What should I do with it?" I smiled. "Keep the lesson, throw away the shame." The next morning, we stood together in the backyard. Emily lit a small fire in the old metal fire pit. Without saying a word, she placed the invitation into the flames. We watched it turn to ashes. As the last piece disappeared, she took my hand. "No more looking backward." I nodded. "Only forward." For the first time in many years, the painful memory of that wedding no longer felt like a wound. It had become the beginning of a better life. And as the evening sky turned golden, I realized that sometimes the happiest families aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who find the courage to forgive, heal, and love each other again. Spring arrived with warm sunshine and blooming flowers. My recovery was slow, but every day I felt a little stronger. Emily visited almost daily. One afternoon she walked into my house carrying a small notebook. "Dad," she said, smiling, "I need your help with something important." "What is it?" "I want to start a foundation." "A foundation?" "Yes. For children who grow up with a single parent." I looked at her in surprise. She opened the notebook and showed me sketches, plans, and lists of ideas. "I want to provide scholarships, school supplies, counseling, and emergency financial help." I turned the pages quietly. At the top of the first page was the foundation's name. The Carter Family Hope Foundation. I looked at her. "You named it after us." She nodded. "I named it after the family that taught me what hope looks like." Within months, the foundation began helping dozens of families. Soon it was hundreds. Emily never sought attention. She simply wanted to make life easier for people facing the same struggles we once faced. One Saturday morning, we attended the opening of the foundation's first community center. Children filled the building with laughter. Parents smiled with relief. A young boy walked up to me holding a toolbox. "Mr. Carter," he said, "Miss Emily told me you can fix almost anything." I laughed. "I've fixed a few things." He looked down. "My bicycle is broken." I smiled. "Let's see what we can do." For the next hour, we repaired the bicycle together. When it was finished, the boy rode around the parking lot, shouting with excitement. Emily watched from across the yard. "You know," she said later, "you still spend your life repairing things." I smiled. Some habits never leave. She shook her head. No, Dad. She looked toward the little boy. You don't just repair bicycles. You repair confidence. You repair hope. As the years passed, the foundation continued to grow. Thousands of children received scholarships. Hundreds of parents found stable housing. Families who had almost given up found a second chance. On my 75th birthday, Emily organized a surprise celebration. Friends, neighbors, former coworkers, and families whose lives had been changed gathered in the community center. I expected a simple dinner. Instead, the lights dimmed. A large screen came to life. Video after video played. Former students, single mothers, retired veterans, construction workers, teachers, each one shared a story about how Emily's projects, or a simple act of kindness from me, had changed their lives. By the time the final video ended, I couldn't hold back my tears. Emily walked onto the stage carrying a small wooden plaque. She handed it to me. Engraved across the front were the words, "A good father doesn't just raise a child. He shapes generations." The room erupted in applause. I looked around at all the smiling faces. Then I looked at Emily. Years ago, I thought I had lost my daughter forever. Instead, I had gained not only my daughter back, but a family far larger than I had ever imagined. As I stood there, holding the plaque, I realized the greatest measure of a person's life is not the money they leave behind. It is the people who become kinder because they knew them. That night, before everyone left, Emily hugged me tightly. I used to think you had nothing to give me. She smiled through tears. Now I know you gave me everything that truly matters. I hugged her back. And you gave me the greatest gift a father could ever receive. She looked up. A second chance. I nodded. A second chance. Life has a strange way of rewarding patience. When I was younger, I believed success meant surviving another difficult week, paying the bills on time, and making sure Emily had food on the table. I never imagined that one ordinary decision, to forgive instead of holding on to anger, would shape the rest of our lives. One autumn afternoon, Emily stopped by my house with exciting news. "Dad," she said, barely able to contain her smile, "the city council has approved our biggest project yet." "That's wonderful. It's more than wonderful." She spread several blueprints across the dining table. "We're going to transform an abandoned industrial area into a complete neighborhood." I examined the plans carefully. There were affordable homes, a medical clinic, a library, a public park, and even a trade school where young people could learn practical skills. I smiled. "You've thought of everything." She laughed. "I learned from someone who always fixed problems instead of complaining about them." Construction lasted nearly 3 years. During that time, Emily often invited local residents to share ideas before building began. She believed that the people who would live there deserved a voice. Many doubted her approach. "It takes too much time," one contractor argued. Emily calmly replied, "Building trust is never a waste of time." When the neighborhood was finally completed, families from every background moved in. Children played safely in the parks. Small businesses opened along the main street. The once forgotten district became one of the city's proudest communities. At the official opening ceremony, the mayor stepped onto the stage. "We have decided that this neighborhood deserves a permanent name." Emily looked surprised. The mayor smiled. "From today forward, this community will be known as Carter Commons." The audience erupted in applause. Emily turned toward me with tears in her eyes. "They named it after you." I quietly shook my head. "No, they named it after everything our family learned." Later that evening, we walked through the park together. Children laughed on the swings. Parents chatted on nearby benches. An elderly couple thanked Emily for giving them a safe place to retire. As we continued walking, Emily said softly, "Dad, do you ever think about the wedding?" I looked at the sunset. "Sometimes." "Does it still hurt?" I smiled gently. "Not anymore." "Why?" "Because if that day had never happened, we might never have become the family we are today." She stopped walking. "I've spent years trying to make up for one terrible decision." "You already have." She looked puzzled. "I forgave you the day you came back." She hugged me tightly. "Thank you." A few months later, my granddaughter graduated from high school. During her graduation speech, she surprised everyone. "My greatest role model isn't a celebrity or a billionaire." She looked toward me in the front row. "It's my grandfather. He taught our family that respect isn't earned through wealth. It's earned through kindness, honesty, and sacrifice." I couldn't stop the tears from falling. After the ceremony, 3 generations of our family stood together for a photograph. As the camera flashed, I realized something I had never understood when I was younger. Love doesn't erase painful memories. It transforms them into lessons that guide the future. The wedding that once nearly destroyed our relationship had become the very reason our family grew stronger. And perhaps that was life's greatest. 10 years passed. The small house where Emily had grown up looked much the same. The paint had been refreshed, the roof repaired, and the garden was now full of roses planted by my granddaughter. One quiet evening, 3 generations of our family gathered on the front porch. Emily sat beside me. Michael prepared dinner on the backyard grill. My granddaughter, Lily, laughed as she chased her little brother through the yard. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. Laughter, conversation, the sound of home. Years earlier, I had sat on this same porch believing I had lost my daughter forever. Now, she was only a few feet away. Life had come full circle. Emily reached into her purse and handed me a small envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a framed copy of the letter she had written after canceling her first wedding. At the bottom, she had added a new sentence. "The greatest blessing of my life wasn't finding the right husband, it was finding my father again." I couldn't speak. She gently squeezed my hand. "You spent years believing you failed because I rejected you." She shook her head. "You never failed." I did. I was too blind to see the love that had been protecting me my entire life. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone beneath the old oak tree in the backyard. The stars filled the sky. I thought about Emily's mother. I wished she could have seen the woman our daughter had become. A gentle breeze moved through the branches. For the first time in many years, my heart felt completely at peace. The next morning, the local newspaper published an article celebrating the 10th anniversary of Carter Commons. The headline read, "One father's quiet sacrifice created a legacy that changed thousands of lives." Emily showed me the article over breakfast. "You deserve this recognition." I smiled. "The families who live there deserve it more." She laughed. "That's exactly why you deserve it." A few weeks later, the community held a celebration in the Central Park. Families from every neighborhood attended. Children who had received scholarships through the Carter Family Hope Foundation stood on stage, sharing their dreams of becoming teachers, nurses, engineers, and firefighters. One by one, they thanked the people who had believed in them. Finally, the host invited Emily to speak. She looked out across the crowd. "When I was younger," she began, "I believed success meant impressing strangers." She paused. "My father taught me that true success is improving the lives of people you'll never even meet." The audience applauded. She smiled toward me. "I almost lost the greatest man I've ever known because I cared too much about appearances." She took a deep breath. "If your parents are still with you, don't wait to appreciate them. Tell them you love them today." When the ceremony ended, dozens of families came forward to thank us. An elderly man shook my hand. "You reminded us that forgiveness is stronger than pride." A young mother hugged Emily. "Your story gave me the courage to reconcile with my own father." As the sun began to set, our family walked home together. My granddaughter slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandpa." "Yes. Will people remember you one day?" I smiled. "I don't know." She grinned. "I will." Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "So will I." At that moment, I realized I didn't need statues, awards, or headlines. The greatest legacy anyone can leave is to raise someone who chooses love over pride, forgiveness over anger, and family over status. That was enough. More than enough. And as I watched my family walk ahead of me, I silently thanked God for the phone call that had once seemed like the worst moment of my life. Because it became the beginning of our greatest blessing. A few months after the community celebration, Emily invited me to the local elementary school. "They're having career day," she said. "The children want to meet someone who inspires people." I laughed. "They invited the wrong man." She smiled. "No, Dad, they invited exactly the right one." The school auditorium was filled with children, teachers, and parents. I wasn't a famous businessman, a politician, or a celebrity. I was simply an old maintenance worker with worn hands and a lifetime of memories. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the microphone and looked at the young faces in front of me. "I've never been the richest man," I began. "I've made mistakes, and I've faced difficult days. But I've learned something important." The room became silent. "People will remember how you treat others far longer than they'll remember what you own." The children listened carefully. "If someone you love makes a mistake, don't be too quick to give up on them. Sometimes people lose their way. What they need most is someone who leaves the light on so they can find their way home. When I finished, the auditorium filled with applause. After the event, a little girl walked up to me. "Mr. Carter," she said shyly, "I want to be kind like you when I grow up." I smiled and gently shook her hand. "Then you've already taken the first step." Outside, Emily stood waiting beside the car. She hugged me tightly. "You've inspired another generation." I looked around at the children laughing on the playground. Maybe that's what life is really about. Years earlier, I believed my story had ended the day my daughter told me not to come to her wedding. I was wrong. That day wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of a journey that taught us both the true meaning of love, forgiveness, humility, and family. As we drove home together, the sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. I smiled quietly. No matter how difficult the past had been, it had led us here, to peace, to healing, and to a family stronger than ever before. And if someone were to ask me whether I would relive every painful moment again just to reach this ending, my answer would be simple. Yes, because in the end, love didn't just mend our broken hearts. It gave us a brand new beginning.